We'll be kicking things off as we talk about Property Tax 2018. Well, after being dormant for several months, property tax is back on the heated discussion roundtable with the government's introduction of new legislative amendments. And just to give you some background information, earlier in March 2018, the Valuation of Land Amendment Bill and the Property Tax Amendment Bill were placed before Parliament and have since been passed. These bills made several noteworthy changes to the rollout of property tax in Trinidad and Tobago, critical elements of which we plan to discuss. And as I mentioned, joining us this morning is Dr. Sunil Lalu, incoming President, Institute of Surveyors of Trinidad and Tobago. Welcome.
Thank you, Vino.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. We have a lot to talk about.
Yes, we do.
So let's talk a little bit about these changes to roll out property tax in Trinidad and Tobago. What are some of those changes and how smooth can we expect it to be rolled out?
Well, there were a number of changes. They introduced a new valuation tribunal to replace the tax appeal board. Some dates were changed, so tax is now due at the end of September rather than the end of December. There were changes to the valuation return form that has to be filed. Definitions were changed so that they would not have any legal battles to fight based on those definitions. And that pretty much sums it up.
Right. So let's talk a little about that valuation rule, as you mentioned. It's in effect, and the amendment states that once 50% of the valuation rule is complete, the minister can declare that the rule is in effect. What is the implication of this?
Well, you see, the question is, for the minister to make a declaration like that, he must be advised by the Commissioner of Valuations. But the real question is, how many properties are there in Trinidad? Does anybody really know? For the Commissioner to say that 50% of the assessments are complete, he must know how many properties there are to begin with. Now, if only 50% is the threshold, then that means that only half of the country property tax will be rolled out for, depending on where they start assessments. Now, I understand that assessments have begun with respect to people who filed the return last year. So does this mean then that the initial rollout is going to be primarily people who dutifully filed a return? They would have to be the ones paying property tax rather than the ones who tore up the form. You know what I'm saying? Also, my question to the minister is, what's going to happen to the rest of the country until they are assessed? Is it that they will not be paying taxes? Will their taxes be charged retroactively when they are assessed? What is going to happen is very unclear.
So a valuation tribunal is to replace the appeal responsibilities of the Tax Appeal Board for matters concerning the valuation of land. What is the composition of this tribunal?
Right now, based on the most recent amendment, it comprises 5 people. A chair, who is an attorney at law, to be appointed by the President on the advice of the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. 2 members who have qualifications and experience in valuation, also to be appointed by the President, and 2 other members.
Okay. And let's talk a little bit about how the valuation members are to be appointed. What's the procedure? What's the process?
Well, unlike the chair, who is appointed on the advice of the GLSC, the Act itself is silent on how valuation members are to be appointed. So there is no indication on who the President will be taking advice from. And this is why the ICT is suggesting that we are the only local institution that validates qualifications and experience in surveying. So we ought to be the ones who the President consults with to appoint valuation members. And that precedent has already been set, because for the Board of Surveyors, some members on the Board of Surveyors are appointed on the advice of the ISTT. So much in the same way that is done, valuation members on the Valuation Tribunal ought to be appointed on our advice as well.
Okay. Now, the new valuation form, how is it different from the previous form?
It's twice as long. So the previous form was about 2 pages. This one is about 4 to 5 pages long. It is designed in a way to be less ambiguous. So before, you just had a category that said location, and you couldn't tell if that is the address, if it is directions to the property, what it was. So now it's longer, but it is designed to capture more information.
Okay.
So it should be better for the Commissioner of Valuations to get more information from it.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about squatters and how is all of these changes, or how are all of these changes going to affect squatters?
The definition of owner was changed in such a way that it would capture the informal occupants on land, which is squatters. Now, the justification is that the squatter built a permanent structure on the land and should be taxed on the basis of that permanent structure. But this is something that we have a fundamental problem with, because property tax is on the basis of a legal interest or legal entitlement to land. And even though paying the tax does not in itself create a legal entitlement, charging squatters a property tax is an acknowledgement that this is an asset that we can tax. As far as I'm concerned, illegal activities should be fined, not taxed. If you are caught importing cocaine in the airport, you're not going to be charged a customs duty on cocaine. You would be fined, you would be put in jail. So the state should avoid at all costs legitimizing illegal activity or informal activity.
All right. Now, how does the amendment impact properties like townhouses, condos, apartments, and even single commercial units?
Well, previously this was a gray area in the Act, and it caused some confusion before because people in condominium complexes were unsure what to do because it was registered as one parcel of land with several different owners of a condo unit or an apartment unit. So many condominium complexes had considered filing one return and one property tax charge on the entire thing, and they work it out who pays what.
Right.
But the new amendment, which is a welcome change, is that now condominiums and townhouses, you can file separately for it as an owner of a condominium or a townhouse unit.
And you think it's a little bit more effective in that way?
Yes.
All right. Let's talk about the tax waiver. The general waiver on property tax was extended to December 2017. You mentioned that that date was changed?
It was September 2017 first, and then that was extended to December 2017 to cover the whole year.
Well, what does that now mean, seeing that?
Well, that means that you could be charged property tax to 2018 regardless of when it comes out. So in as much as the state is pushing forward to have this out as soon as possible, it's not likely that it is going to be. They still have a phenomenal amount of work to do. So if it does come out in 2019, which it is likely to, then 2018 could be charged retroactively if the waiver only extends to December 2017. Now, what is interesting that many people aren't mentioning is that the Act makes it clear that a notice of assessment must be served by March 31st. This means that to have property tax due by September, you have to get a notice that your property has been valued and assessed, and this is your property tax by March. March for this year is already gone. So the talk of having property tax come out this year is inconsistent with the legislation. The earliest it can come out is 2019, which would mean that if the waiver still stays at December 2017, your tax bill in 2019 will be for 2 years.
Wow. You know, we're having this conversation, but are members of the public aware of this? Are people aware of this? The details, the intricacies?
I think all of the effort to talk about things like door canals and stuff like that distract from the real issues that ought to be addressed. That is a non-issue for my part. I can tell you as a professional surveyor, a door canal, a detached prayer room is not going to add value to a property. Those are non-issues. But these are the things that should be highlighted.
What are your thoughts on the point of specific waivers? The statements have been made.
That does not exist, and I want to make that very clear. We've heard in the media many times of different individuals saying that if somebody is receiving public assistance or if they are making less than $3,500 per month, that they can apply for a waiver. There is no such thing. Waivers do not exist in the legislation. The word isn't even there. What is available is relief under deferral, which is fundamentally different. It means that you are charged tax now, but you don't have to pay it now. But in the same way as if you don't pay your electricity bill, and TNTEC tells you, fine, we're not going to charge you interest, the bill still adds up. So at some point in the year 2025 or whenever, you would have to be paying 2018, 19, 20, 21. All of that will accumulate as a debt. So at some point it will have to be cleared. And for the very latest, when your property is inherited by a child, or if you decide to sell your property or transfer it to somebody else, at that point, all the back taxes will have to be cleared at that stage. That is the relief that is offered, not a waiver.
But is it a relief?
Well, is it? Well, that's what I'm wondering myself. Because if you're telling me that somebody who legitimately cannot afford to pay property tax now, cannot pay $1,000 for the year now, then in 5 years, they're not going to be able to pay $5,000 in back taxes. That's not likely.
Wow. Now, as far as you're aware, what sort of methodology should be used in assessing the annual rental value?
Now, arriving at a rental value for a property in the private sector, the property is considered as an individual asset and it is treated as such. It is compared to other properties that are rented on the open market. But that will be a very, very laborious task if we were to do that for every property in the country. So a much simpler method has to be employed. And I would like to suggest that a tier-based approach is done, in which case properties are categorized.
Okay.
So you say this is a high-income area, and every 3-bedroom house in a high-income area of average finishes will rent for, let's say, $3,000 a month. I'm giving a figure randomly. So in other words, we create these broad categories for properties and use rental bands. A rental band is where we say, generally speaking, every 2-bedroom apartment will rent for $2,500 a month.
Right.
So these rental bands based on these categories and simply categorize every property in accordance with this tier-based system. So the taxation system will be much more transparent that way and easier to operationalize.
Were there other suggestions made in terms of what approach would be taken to assess?
Well, I've heard sometime in 2009, and it was reiterated last year, that they were categorizing property as standard residential 1, standard residential 2. So it appears as though they do have a tier-based system in place, but whether they are using rental bands is I don't know.
What are your thoughts on the online property database, which was spoken about back in 2009 and also reiterated in 2018?
I think that not enough attention is being brought to that point. It's being said in passing, but let's be very clear on what that really is. Imagine you can go online and check anybody's property tax liability. Right? That is something very, very crucial to this exercise, because for people to see that the tax that they are paying is equitable, they must be able to compare it to their neighbors.
Right.
And this will only facilitate that. Now, we've only been hearing it in passing, and I hope that the state plans to carry out that online database.
So you think it's absolutely crucial?
Absolutely crucial.
That it's going to be made available
to the public. Open access.
All right. So overall, what are your thoughts on the amendments? Are there any concerns or suggestions you'd like to make?
I think that generally the amendments were good. They were good amendments. They helped to clarify a lot of things. But issues like changing the definition of land so that we can have multiple owners listed for and have squatting, I think it was done in a very laissez-faire manner. Right? Instead of that, we should have arrived at a definition for property that would capture all the different types of real estate. Now you're saying that a condominium is land, just so that it gets captured in the legislation, because the legislation refers to valuation of land, not valuation of property.
Right.
But it is a property tax act. It's not a land act. It's not a land tax act. Do you understand? There's some confusion which should have been treated more thoroughly in that regard. And you also have to look at the issues in land administration that's going to be faced by the rush rollout. That squatting issue is one. 75 to 80% of the country is unauthorized development, meaning that it wasn't approved by Town and Country.
75%?
Yes.
Wow.
Senior planners have given me that estimate. 75 to 80% of the country is unauthorized development. But we are taxing based on actual use, not on authorized use. So that too could amount to the state legitimizing what the state itself considers to be illegal activity.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
What are your closing comments at this time?
I think the key issue now is public education. The state isn't doing enough, isn't doing nearly enough to educate the public, and because of that lack of education, people are fear-mongering, they're speculating, and if the state were to make a conscientious effort to go out there and educate the public, we'd be in a better situation than we are now.
So you do foresee this being rushed?
Yes.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to, educate us, first and foremost on this.
It's my pleasure.
This very interesting topic. Dr. Sunil Lalo, incoming president, Institute of Surveyors of Trinidad and Tobago. We take a short break. A lot more when we return. Stay tuned.